This episode is brought to you by AudioQuest. With products to fill every need and prices to suit every budget, AudioQuest is made for you. Visit AudioQuest.com for more information.
Right then, Srajan, we're back for another round of podcasting about, well, news or new-ish items in the hi-fi world with a view to going deeper on them, deeper than your average sort of news story might go. And I believe...
This much deeper.
This much, like a puddle deeper, right? And I believe in this episode, you're going to kick us off with something a little bit wacky. Am I right?
Yes. I'm going to start out by asking you a question.
Okay.
What sucks?
What sucks? Vacuum cleaners suck.
There you go. And what blows?
I don't know.
A blow dryer would.
A hairdryer.
And a fan blows air, right?
Okay. Oh, I know a company that makes both of those. Yeah, okay. I know where you're going with this.
Which would be?
It'd be Dyson. They make fans and vacuum cleaners. I use a Dyson. Yeah.
Correct. But have you heard of Dyson strawberries?
Dyson strawberries?
Yep.
As in Erdbeeren?
Yes.
Okay. No, I've not heard of Dyson strawberries. What the hell is this?
This is what a lot of people don't know. But Dyson has 4 farms in England that are very futuristic, forward-thinking. And one of them, and I'm going to now look at my cheat sheet so I get the numbers right. It's a 26-acre glass house in Lincolnshire's Carrington in the UK. It is 760 meters long.
Okay.
It contains 1,456 rows of 1,225,000 strawberry plants. And this glass house produces 1,250 tons of strawberries each year. It's powered with renewable energy from an anaerobic harvester, they call it. This harvester produces gas. The gas powers turbines. The turbines generate enough electricity to power 10,000 homes for a year. So Dyson actually sells back electricity to the power company. They use the heat that the turbines generate to warm the greenhouse via a climate control system. They have a rainwater collection on the roof that they store in a lagoon to irrigate the plants. They have an on-site pack house, on-site cold storage, robotic fruit picking, and UV pest control.
Sounds
the reason why I wanted to,
yeah.
It's very state of the art. It's like you think farming should be in the future, where it's a holistic, sort of circular. We are producing the energy that we need for this farm. All the byproducts that we are generating are being reused or going to other industries. It just shows that Dyson and Mr. James Dyson, who is the inventor, they're more than just a company who produces household appliances. They have some really forward-looking and forward-thinking engineering in-house. I did not know this until recently, but Dyson's first headphone was called the Zone. It was very big, but then it had an attachment which is an air purifier.
Yeah, it came across the mouth, yeah.
This thing weighed 1.3 pounds without this visor and nearly 1.5 pounds with the visor. And it sold for 669 euros without the air purifier, which obviously came out during the
pandemic.
During COVID.
Yeah. So that's about 700 grams, 800 grams?
Yeah,
like that. Yeah,
exactly. Now they have a new headphone. And this is in the product category that I don't know very much about. So you do, however, know a lot about it. And I'm going to run some of the specs by you to see how they sort of measure up to what seems to be standard in this industry.
Okay.
So we're starting out, this is a full-size, circumaural, over-ear, over-the-head headphone, not an earbud. It uses a 40mm dynamic driver. It's 16 ohm nominal impedance. It uses active noise cancellation that claims to be effective by 40 dB. How does that number strike you? Claimed noise attenuation.
Most manufacturers don't publish that number.
Okay.
So
I've seen, or no, either seen or read a review where somebody claimed they were out in the yard mowing the lawn while wearing that headphone with the active noise cancellation active, and they could hear nothing of the lawnmower. That would suggest quite effective noise suppression, wouldn't it?
It would. I mean, the industry leader in noise cancellation is Apple, with Sony not far behind. And then everybody else is just playing catch up with those guys. So it surprises me to hear this, that they've got this from Dyson, but I guess it all counts for nothing if the headphone doesn't sound very good. By the way, 4 centimeters for the driver is bog standard.
Okay. So they are using 8 microphones to do the active noise cancellation, and they claim that they're using a 384 kilohertz sampling rate. So that's how many times the microphone will actually measure the noise to then compensate. DSP assisted bandwidth is claimed to be 6 hertz to 21 kilohertz. 21 kilohertz will be completely bog standard. 6 hertz, if true and possible via DSP assistant, that sounds unusually extended in the bass. Now we're getting to something where I'm curious, and that is battery life. They put 2 batteries into the headband on the side. So they have the cushy pad on the top, but then they have bigger batteries than would fit inside the ear cup on the side of the headband. And they're claiming in ANC mode, so with noise cancellation on, 55 hours on a charge. Now that strikes me as unusual.
Not especially, because Sennheiser's Momentum 4, I believe, does 60. And they've got the batteries in the ear cups. And I think there's another one that also has a fairly... Is it the Cambridge Audio one that just came out? Maybe that's got a fairly high battery runtime. But yeah, I mean, look, it
would be on the higher end, correct?
Yes, it's higher than Sony. It's higher than the Apple AirPods Max. I think battery life is becoming a very sort of fought over spec. People really want to know that they can get on a plane, fly anywhere in the world, and the battery not run out. I think that's what people are going for. So yeah, 40 hours will definitely cover you for that.
Okay. Now they say that on a 10-minute quick charge, you'll be able to listen for 2.5 hours.
Standard.
And on a 30-minute quick charge, 9 hours. Are those standard specs?
Yeah, standardish. Yeah, I mean, 30, yes, more or less, yeah.
All right. So obviously they have an app that seems to be standard in this product category.
It does,
and the app embeds 3 EQ curves, bass boost, enhance, and neutral. And they also have 3 noise cancellation modes. So they have the full isolation. Then they have, I call it leakage, but the official term is transparency. So you hear some noise, and then they have off, and you tap on the back plate to activate that. And out of the 8 microphones, 2 of them are dedicated to phone calls. This was a hard spec to find, but apparently the Bluetooth algorithm they are using is Bluetooth 5.0, which is not the latest one. And does that mean anything to the potential buyer?
I guess manufacturers would argue yes, but as somebody who's really in this for the sound quality of these headphones and not really very much else, it has no bearing on the codecs that are specified inside the headphone. So something could be 5.0 or 5.3, and maybe one is more efficient than the other. It's actually, I never really pay attention to that because I want to know about the codecs. And if it does, it needs to do AAC for Apple, minimum. And then, does it do aptX, Srajan? Does it do it, or does it LDAC? Or?
It doesn't say any of it. Yeah, I can't find those specs. That's the disappointing thing about the Dyson website and this headphones product page at the moment. It took me some digging to even find out what the weight is, which is a very basic spec. That happens to be 451 grams, which is on the heavier side. But I can't find anything about the supported codecs.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they just do AAC across the board. I'm not quite sure. I mean, most headphone companies, apart from Apple, do either an aptX flavor or an LDAC. That's Android only. Mm-hmm. So the iPhones only talk AAC. So you just need to cover that off. Otherwise, it falls back to SBC. Now, people love to rubbish SBC. It depends upon the phone as to how good that will sound, because implementation, weirdly enough, of these codecs is also a factor. Mm-hmm. And there's no spec for implementation as there's no spec for any kind of implementation, really, right? So it's very tricky trying to work out anything meaningful beyond, runtime and weight is what I want to know. Mm-hmm. Those are very important specs from the press release. Codecs I'd want to know. ANC I would want to know if it exists, because not all Bluetooth headphones have ANC, although most of them do. And the big players, you're not a big player without ANC. But how good that ANC is just, it's always up in the air until you try them.
Right.
So
now there's a few more things about this headphone, that the gimbaled arms fold flat, and the whole thing is shipped in a bag that is very, very flat. In fact, when you take the headphone out, the whole bag just squishes like a sandwich. And this is a rather big headphone, so they seem to have done a nice way that it can sort of fold up and not take up too much space in your luggage.
But would the bag be rugged enough to deal with the sort of the knocks that it might get in like an overhead locker on a plane or something? Because
not sure. From the photo, I couldn't tell.
Pretty rough and tumble, that isn't it? So.
Yeah. And they also say that the microfiber ear cushions with rebound foam are made so that you can hand wash them.
Ah, that's unusual.
Because they realize that sweat will eventually collect, and eventually you might just want to either have a new pair of pads or wash the ones that you do have.
I think most people go for replacements, don't they?
Now, because Dyson is a company known for industrial design and sort of colorful, slightly sort of futuristic, lots of plastic and shiny bits and bobs, this headphone comes with 4 different colorways, and they are called silver, copper, cinnabar, and nickel. So that's the metal frame. Mm-hmm. Then they have 7 different end caps in 7 different colors and 7 different cushion colors. So by my math, that gives us 196 different combinations. So they go very much after the, you're wearing this thing, you're making a fashion statement, go and optimize it and sort of customize the look to your liking. And the last thing I should say is, what does it cost? Having given you the specs, and you having experience with the sector, and knowing who it's from, do you have any sort of guess where that will probably fall price-wise?
I think I already know, actually.
Okay.
I think, is it $450?
$499.
Yeah, that's...
But maybe in store it's $450, I don't know.
That's at the upper end of this, of the prosumer headphones. Once you get above that to like Focal Batiste, the Levinson, the T+A, they're just like another league again. Right. So $500 is roughly where... Srajan, your chair is off the dial again today. It's got a life of its own, that chair.
I'm moving.
Yeah. So yeah, the Apple headphone is about $500 now. It's been around for a couple of years. All credit to Apple actually for not rinsing it through with a version 2 immediately after the version 1. They've let this one live for like 4 or 5 years, something like that, which I think is great. Because it's a very competitive space, and most companies like Sony put out a new model every year. Sennheiser, I think, every 2 years. So it's probably the most closely fought space in all of audio, I would think. Over-ear noise-cancelling headphones, more so than the true wireless in-ears, because a lot of people don't get on with the in-ears. They want the over-ears, especially when they're on a plane, because the noise cancellation from a passive, like big pair of headphones is generally better because you've got, sorry, when I say passive, I don't mean passive headphones. I mean, you get the passive isolation from a big headphone.
Right. Now, you've seen the photos that I sent and that you will run for this podcast. Would you buy them based on the looks or not? Because you hate the looks?
I hate the looks.
Or would you buy them because or not because they're made by Dyson and they have, as far as you know, no traction in our space?
I'm very sensitive to the looks of headphones, mainly because I'm 2 meters tall and I look like a Cyberman with most pairs on. So the ones you're wearing today, Srajan, I would probably never wear outside of the house. I know they're not designed for that, but so if it's a noise cancelling headphone, generally it's intended for use outside of the house.
Right.
I would say no to anything big and bulky, and the Dyson to me look big and bulky. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, even the Sonos ones that came out a couple months ago, I'd probably go for those. But I own the Sennheiser, the Apple, the Sony, but I only ever use them in winter because they're too hot and sweaty in the summer, right? Like right now. So, because it's such a closely thought space, it would have to be something exceptional for me to go for it. I always buy these. I mean, I never get manufacturers to send them to me. So, yeah, it's a no from me, Srajan, just based on looks alone. I'm sorry.
Yeah, same here.
Do you know what I think about all of the Dyson stuff? It comes back to the strawberry farm thing that you mentioned at the start. Is I think they're just doing these headphones just for fun, for their own amusement, because they probably got enough money just to throw things out, just to see what sticks. So it's probably just a public R&D exercise, because the first one with the air filter, I mean, by any stretch of the imagination, that is completely bonkers.
I think it was laughed out of court in a way.
Yes.
I mean, whoever did review it, and I don't believe there were many, especially not in sort of the professional audio review space, they really trash talked it. So that must have bombed. So then to try it again.
This is what I mean. They're doing R&D in public. I think that's what they're doing. They're just trying to refine it, because you never know. Sometimes some of the most crazy ideas might stick, and maybe had the pandemic gone on for much, much longer, maybe they would have sold more. But because it didn't, thankfully, that whole idea of clean air in your immediate vicinity probably died off for most people. So now they're like, well, we don't need to do that anymore necessarily, so let's try it again, and we'll have another go at it. Because they're an engineering company, aren't they? They're for blowing and sucking, right? That's what they do. So I guess, if you think about a headphone diaphragm, it's moving forwards, it's moving backwards. I'm stretching the physics analogy here a little bit, but I just think it's a bit of a wacky exercise that they're sort of conducting. I don't know how serious they are. I just think they can probably just afford to do whatever. I mean, the parallel for me in the hi-fi world is shit audio, who quite clearly to me now are just making any product that they feel like making, because their small stuff is keeping them liquid and in business and doing probably very well. So then Jason and Mike can go, well, let's make this thing. Let's make this crazy-ass tube amp. Let's make this phono stage. Let's make a DSP equalizer. And let's make another one, right? So they're just having fun in public, which I think is great. I mean, Dyson, obviously, a much, much bigger company, a much more wealthy company. We won't get into the politics of the owner. I don't necessarily see eye to eye with, but I just think it's a company that's got enough money to have fun with experimentation in public.
Quite possibly.
There's not a lot on the line, so...
Well, over to you with something maybe more realistic for our listeners.
Yeah, I'm going to start with an amplifier brand, Srajan. Now, what do you think of when you think of Rotel?
Well, Rotel, I think made in China. I think about the original association with B&W. Mm-hmm. I don't know exactly what the relationship was, but I believe they had the same distributor, and very often B&W stores would sell Rotel electronics and vice versa. Yep. And I also am thinking about the very, very upscale brand Mishi. Yep. Which is to Rotel what I guess Lexus would be to, what is it, Toyota?
Oh, it's a car question, Srajan. I've got no idea.
Okay.
Yes, you're right, it is, because Lexus, I heard some... Oh God! I actually heard the origin story of the name Lexus the other day, and I've completely forgotten it, and that's terrible. But it was designed to appeal to the West. It was designed purely as a luxury brand name for the West. Right. But yeah, so you're right. Rotel still have an association with Bowers and Wilkins. Their stuff is made in the same Zhuhai factory as the Bowers entry level stuff. it's one of the few factories I've visited. And the thing that impressed me the most about Rotel when I was there was that they still do this as well. They wind their own transformers.
Right.
So when they put out a new amplifier, I always take an interest also because Rotel, I think, was one of the first brands that I bought as a sort of budding audiophile consumer in the 90s. In fact, yeah, it was the 920AX or something like that. So whenever Rotel put out a entry-level amplifier, I always pay attention because that's where I started, right? And they announced one this year. Now, this story is a little bit spicy because it's kind of hard for me to tell. Sorry, my phone is going. Let me just turn this off. It's hard for me to tell whether this was a deliberate mistake or an accidental mistake. So, Rotel announced a new entry-level integrated amplifier, and it's called the A8. It's a very simple, slimline, low-profile design, Class A/B. It's got a phono stage, 3-line level inputs, and that's pretty much it, right?
What's the power, like 60 watts?
Well, that's the thing. That's where the story gets interesting. So, in the press release, they only published a single rating, right, which is 40 watts per channel. But, and here's the wrinkle, that was only into 4 ohms. Now, whenever I see this, and when I don't see an 8 ohm rating, I'm thinking, okay, why? Why haven't you given an 8 ohm rating? Because, correct me if I'm wrong here, Srajan, and maybe I am, but I think 8 ohms is the standard for publishing the power specs of an amplifier. And then you give 4 as well if your amp does that, or you want people to use 4 ohm nominal speakers. Am I wrong here?
But if your 4 ohm rating, as it mostly is double that of the 8 ohm rating, and the 8 ohm rating doesn't look very impressive, then you might be inclined to only list the 4 ohm rating.
Well, that's it. But I just think I can't say that Rotel pulled a sneaky one here. But when I wrote it up, I was like, well, there's no 8 ohm rating here. So the 4 ohm rating is 40 watts per channel. So I made the quite reasonable assumption that it was going to be 20 watts per channel into 8 ohms, which I think then caught Rotel's attention, and their British PR guy emailed me and going, actually, no, it's 30 ohms, right? So I asked, like, why wasn't it on the website? And they said it is. And it was in this really small print area of the spec page. And I can't believe I missed it first time round, and I really wish I'd taken a screenshot because I don't think it was there. And it's not on the sort of amplifier summary page that they have.
Right.
So I said to them, look, in future, could you please specify 8 ohms and 4 ohms? And they were like, yeah, that's a reasonable suggestion. We'll definitely try and do that, as we announce new products. But it makes it very hard, I think, for the consumer to even compare 2 amps on the shelf if they don't know what the 8 ohm power rating is. Even though Peter Como a couple of weeks ago told me in a podcast that there's been this sort of industry move towards 4 ohm nominal speakers. Because he said, because they play louder in the demo room. I don't know whether that's true or not, but he knows more about what sells than I do, because he designs Wharfedale, Mission, Quad, those kinds of things. But I think to the entry-level consumer to whom the A8 is aimed, I think the 8 ohm rating is essential. It's important to know that.
Yeah.
And I'm not singling out Rotel, because I remember Peachtree pulled this stunt with the very first Nova back in 2009, maybe. They gave a 6 ohm rating.
Right.
And even then, I knew way less than I know now, and I don't know very much now. But even then I was like, 6 ohms? That's a bit weird, isn't it? Because they were just trying to make it look higher than it actually was. So it's a bit of a slippery, it could be, potentially, a slippery trick that a manufacturer could pull to convince the unwitting consumer that their amplifier is more powerful than it actually is. So I guess my advice to people reading spec sheets or news items is, yes, look at the power rating, but also ask yourself, into how many ohms is that power rated? Because I saw a lot of people write up this Rotel news story, breeze through the 4 ohm rating, didn't call into question the absence of an 8 ohm. I thought, why not? I don't know. It was just a bit of an odd one for me. So
The last bit on your segment. So it's a 30 watt into 8 ohm integrated amplifier, Class AB.
Yep.
What's the price?
Oh yes, the price. Yeah, I should have covered this really, shouldn't I? It's €400, £400, $450 US. So
It is really affordable.
That's where I started with that exact model. Excuse me, in the Rotel range, and I was there for a while. I had an RA. Was it an RA3 or 2? And I think I maybe had the 6. And then I had the pre-power of the RB and the RC, I think they were called. And I thought they were great. I don't see the need to kind of obfuscate specs. I just think it's unnecessary.
So in today's space, who do you think would be the direct head-on competitor to Rotel as a brand? Would it be something like Cambridge?
Yeah, Cambridge would be my first. It's always really been Cambridge and NAD.
And NAD, right?
Yeah. NAD, they've gone completely Class D. There's only one model that they make, it's Class AB. I don't even know if they still make it. But I know that Greg Stetson at NAD has said, we're not doing AB anymore. We're gonna be pushing forward with D. So I guess you'd see Rotel as the sort of more of an old school manufacturer, because even Cambridge, I think not all of their entry level amps are Class AB. I think some of them. No, I've got to be careful here. So I won't sort of postulate what they might be, but I'm pretty sure they're not all Class AB. So.
Does Rotel make a Class D amplifier already?
I think they've been there, done that, and walked away from it.
Okay.
So I think they're back to doing. I think most of the stuff that they make is AB.
Okay.
Because they've got the toroidal transformer winding facility in the factory. So, yeah.
Plus, if they're the lone holdout at that sort of price segment, why not?
Yeah, even I fall foul of the sort of Class AB snobbery. So if one of my friends, said to me, John, hey, what affordable amplifier should I get? I would say, look, go and get the AB Rotel, because it's more likely to satisfy you than, say, a Class D from another brand, For the same money. For the same money, because right. I've heard I'm not going to name names, but I have heard a couple of the cheaper Chinese Class D amps, and they just don't do it for me at all. They're cold and they're thin. Mm-hmm. They work and they're fine, and I'm sure I'm going to get loads of hate for saying that, but they just, I don't know. And this is why I think maybe Rotel have been sort of drawn into the specs race, because the Chinese are kind of making inroads into all sorts of spaces at the entry level now, and they're producing 50, 100 watt Class D amps like that in very tiny chassis.
Right.
So maybe they feel the need to compete with that. So maybe 40 watts is well, it's not quite 80.
More impressive than 30.
Well, it is, but it's such. Had it been 20, I would have been more sympathetic to them just putting out the 4 ohm rating. But it was 30. Well, okay, 30 is fine. But I guess it just takes a little bit of understanding of what you can get from a 30 watt Class AB amplifier as opposed to, say, an 80 watt Class D, because I don't think an 80 watt Class D sounds markedly more powerful than a 30 watt Class AB, all other things being equal, but I could be wrong.
And it will also depend on the power supply, what that can actually swing.
Yes.
When placed on demand for a short period.
Yeah, it's almost like a lottery, isn't it? Being an entry level audio person now, you walk into a store. Well, the cheap Chinese amps aren't there, so I think that's probably a good thing. So you're going to see Cambridge, NAD, Rotel. I think Creek have just come back with another couple of bits of electronics after some time away. I'm pretty sure I saw a German press release for that last week. So, yeah, that's interesting. But I think that's a sort of a smaller brand with lower levels of distribution than Rotel, because, as you say, with the Bowers Association, Rotel have got distribution all over the world, as do Cambridge, as do NAD. So, yeah, that's probably why they are seen as the big three, because they're everywhere.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't know how many podcasts ago we highlighted a new company out of Singapore called LessLoss.
Yeah, it might have been two. Was it 2 episodes ago?
So LAiV, like live audio, but it's actually spelled LAiV.
Right, you had the Harmony DAC.
Correct. And since that time, that Harmony DAC has amassed 5 awards.
Okay.
And probably going on another 10 reviews that are very, very favorable. It's kind of like a Phelpsian gold grab in a single Olympic, which is unusual for a new brand and model to sort of get that kind of recognition so quickly.
Right.
And now we have our second product that is just about to come. And it's called the HP2A. And that sells for the same price, $2,700 US dollars, Singapore direct. It's in exactly the same half-width chassis, same look. But now this is a preamplifier and headphone amplifier. And I just got the specs yesterday. The volume control is, first of all, this is a completely balanced machine. So including the volume control has to be balanced. And that is a discrete resistor ladder coupled via a silent optocoupler. And when you actually look inside the machine, there's 2 sort of thin slivers that look like sort of single sandwich slices in half, encased in gold anodized aluminum. And so the resistor ladders are sitting in there.
Okay.
The preamplifier stage is discrete, buffered Class A with 0 voltage gain. So it's just an active buffer that ensures that you have very low, steady, non-variable output impedance regardless of volume setting. And then the amplifier stage is fully balanced, and it's using 4 lateral Hexagon MOSFETs per channel. That's twice as many as in the Enlium that you and I have, and it's twice as many as are in my Kinky TRH1 headphone amplifier. So 4 Class A/B fully balanced lateral MOSFET transistors per channel. On the reverse, we have 1 XLR input, we have XLR and RCA outputs, we have little 3.5 mil in and out triggers, and then we have 1 multi-pin umbilical for an external extender that is optional. They call it LEXT, L-E-X-T. It's probably line level extender.
Right.
That adds inputs and it adds a phono stage.
Okay.
The voltage gain of the headphone stage is 12 dB. And when you're coming in balanced, which is the only way you can go in without the extender, the industry standard for the maximum output voltage of an XLR DAC would be 4 volts. Usually it's 2 volts, RCA, 4 volts, balanced. It could be a lot more, but usually it's at least 4 volts.
Yes, it can often be a lot more, yes.
If you have the 4 volts, here are the output figures, and they're tremendous. And now I'm going to have to read my cheat sheet.
That's okay.
Into 16 ohms, it's 15 watts balanced, and 6 watts, 6.3 mil quarter inch, the regular headphone jack.
Right.
Into 32 ohms, it's still 12 watts balanced, and 3 watts single-ended.
Okay.
By the time we get to 80 ohms, we have 5 watts and 1 watt. And by the time we get to 300 ohms, very few headphones have such high impedance, but there is some. We're still looking at 1 watt balanced and 1/3 of a watt single-ended.
Are these continuous ratings, Srajan?
Yep.
Okay.
But again, we have 4 transistors per channel. And the Enlium amp does 25 watts into 8 ohms and 40 watts into 4 ohms, Class A/B, into loudspeakers.
Yes.
So this is a tremendous amount of power for headphones, and basically means that no matter what headphone you have or think about buying one day, this amplifier will drive them all. And the reason why the headphone output, the preamplifier outputs don't have any gain any voltage gain. Obviously, they have current gain. That's easy to see as well, right? Because there's hardly any amplifiers today that are not driven to full output with with more than 2 volts. If you have a 2 volt output signal from a CD player, you can drive your amplifier to full output very easily. Usually, the input sensitivity could be 0.7 volts for an amplifier. It could be 1.5. It's certainly not more than 2. So if you have a 4 volt output from a preamplifier, you have to keep turning the volume down below what's called unity gain, below the output voltage that your source is inputting. So a modern preamplifier doesn't need voltage gain. All that is going to do is create noise. So very cleverly, this piece is basically like a passive preamplifier, except it's actively buffered, but it doesn't add gain. And the gain only comes in on the headphones, which may need it because some headphones are very inefficient. Now, here's an interesting thing that I did not know until it happened to me. Now, I'm sure you have gone to a Chinese restaurant and you have crumbled the cookie, right? The fortune cookie. And you pulled out the thing and it read, and Lao Tzu say, shit happens. Has it ever happened to you in reviews where something misbehaves? It doesn't work as it's supposed to, or it just stops working altogether, like a component, a speaker, an amplifier, a DAC.
Oh man, I think it's happened once in like 10 years. It doesn't happen very often.
No, it doesn't. The reason is, I believe, is that most manufacturers check for infant mortality. That's what they call it.
Right.
And they all say that if something is going to go wrong, it happens in the first, 20 hours, 40 hours.
Yep.
And they test for that in the factory before they ship it out. And you and I, as reviewers, we don't really hold on to things too long. My turnaround time, since I do this full time, tends to be about 3 weeks. That's what I request.
Faster than me. Wow. Okay.
But even if I held on to something for 2 months, that's not very long for something to go wrong. Well, I bought the LAiV Harmony DAC after its review.
I recall, yes.
Which means I've had it a lot longer than my usual review period. And 2 weeks ago, it stopped working. All the lights came on, but it couldn't lock to a signal.
Nobody home.
No matter what I put on, no matter what the sample rate was, no matter what input I used, no matter what source I used, it just said signal not recognized. So I said, damn, and something a little juicier. And then I sent out an email. And I said, well, this is what happened. And since I have a USB input, you can probably reflash the firmware, can't you? And the reply came, sorry to hear about. And we think it's either the input board or the display board. And because ours is a modular design, anybody can replace these. And we'll ship them out to you right away. Literally the next day, I had a tracking number. I had an email with a photograph that showed me what was going to be in my care package, which included like those anti-static gloves and that wristband, right? Yep. It included extra screws, and it included a link to a YouTube video on how to change those 2 parts. I changed the first part, which was the input board. It took me less than 10 minutes. That immediately solved the problem. And I thought, I'm going to keep the display board for eventualities. And then my contact, Wang, said, no, change the display board as well. It's been improved since we sent this to you.
Okay.
And then they've picked them up already because obviously they want to see what exactly went wrong. The reason I'm saying that is a very, very important aspect of buying a LAiV component from this company. Which is that their designs are modular. They're made to be user serviceable. So rather than having to pack the thing up, find the box in your garage, hopefully you still have the original shipping box, ship the thing back to Singapore, which is going to be downtime. It's going to be shipping. There might be there might be some sort of customs clearance to pay or to struggle with when it comes back. There's going to be a time delay. You might need a return authorization number. All you have to do is send an email, You'll get the parts that you need to repair it yourself. You get the instructions. It puts you in charge, and it basically secures your investment. And I do not know of a whole lot of companies that design from the get-go with user repairability in mind. So I was told the same thing is true for the HP2A, the preamp headphone amplifier I was just talking about. I remember one of my readers had an issue with a kinky amplifier. He had some noise, and no matter what he did, he couldn't get rid of the noise. They sent him new output stages. 2 new output stages.
Yeah.
And he said it took him 15 minutes to change them, and it solved the problem. And this reader, when he read about my sort of mishap, he said, in a weird way, that makes you even more beholden to a brand, doesn't it? And I said, absolutely. But I said, this aspect is something that reviews don't cover a whole lot, because in general, things don't go ape during the period that we have them. It has only happened because I bought the thing and I've used it well beyond my usual review period. But that's why I think it's actually a feature to shop for, if one can, that if I had the option between 2 components that I thought I would enjoy equally, and I like their looks and the price is pretty much within reason, but I find out that one of them is a modular design that I can repair myself, and the other one is not. I know that every day of the week and twice on Sunday, I would go with a modular design, just because if you're spending $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 or possibly more on a component, and you have it for a year or 2, and suddenly something goes wrong, that thing has not sort of lived to the end of its life. You want more out of it, and it shouldn't require you having to ship something back to China or America and be without it for 2 or 3 weeks and having to pay the shipping and worry about VAT when it comes back from America, and I'm living in Ireland, and then having to fight with customs that no.
Yeah.
If you don't have to do that, I think that's a real feature. It's a sales feature, and I'm actually surprised that Life hasn't made more of a promotion about it. Like they haven't sort of banged their own drum. And I mentioned this in the introduction to my review of this HP2A. What went wrong with my DAC and how they fixed it. And it's not that I got any special treatment. They were like completely prepared. They had this sort of repair kit ready.
Right.
And they had the video up already. So it's not like that a regular paying customer, and I paid for it anyways, would sort of get second-class treatment.
Right, they didn't scramble to shoot a video just because you emailed them about a fault with your product. No. Yeah, right. I mean, I tend to look for products that are made in the EU, so that if I have an issue, I don't have to cross a commercial border out and back in again, as you've just mentioned, with customs. So that I don't really consider modularity. I just consider like what happens when it goes wrong. The UK can be a problem now because things are coming across that border. It can get a bit spicy with customs sometimes, not always, but can be. So, and I think that's why a lot of people in the US just shop US made, because getting something from overseas or having to deal with an issue can be a real pain in the butt. Okay, all right. Well, I've got to look up a number, Srajan, because I've realised that I hadn't looked up a very important specification which we have mentioned already today regarding the Dyson. And okay, I found it. There we go. Okay,
must be the weight.
You're correct. It is the weight. I'm gonna hold up something to camera now. So, can we see this, Srajan? Let me just.
Yes, we can. It looks like a slightly thick digital audio player.
Right, it's the portable player from Astell&Kern. It's called the SP3000. Can you guess its 3 major disadvantages?
Over
other players in this segment. Over other players in this segment. So what's the first thing do you think that most people would comment on this player? We've just touched on it.
It's too big, or it's thick, and I would think it's probably quite heavy because of it.
Exactly, it's heavy. So it's 493 grams.
Okay.
So that's pretty.
It's a half a kilo.
It's pretty beefy to have this thing in your pocket, right? I've got to qualify this before we go any further. Actually, this is the best sounding portable player I've ever heard. It's just bloody fantastic. But you pay for it, and that's the other disadvantage, because it's like 4,000 euros or thereabouts. Like, it's mega money, so you've got to be so far into portable audio and out the other side to justify spending that kind of money on this kind of product. And this isn't the only $4,000 plus DAP on the market. There are quite a number of them. I've got a friend in Portugal who owns at least 4 of them. So he's got like, what's he got? A Cayenne. He's got one with a tube in it. Anyway, he's got a whole bunch of them. So that's 2 disadvantages, weight and price. Now, do you know what the third disadvantage is? This is specific to Astell&Kern, and you might not know, because I know you don't deal with this particular aspect of portable players, because you're an
it must be the operating system, and
yes,
maybe they're using Android 10 and you're concerned about support.
Nope. Close, but not quite. So it does run a custom version of Android, but it's so custom that there's no Google Play Store where you would normally install apps from, which you would normally install apps like a phone. So there's a whitelist of apps, and there's like Apple Music, Tidal, Qobuz, RuneArc, which I'm having real problems getting RuneArc to connect to my server. I think it's an older version of RuneArc. Anyway, so there's no Google Play Store. Now, I think for most people, this is not an entry-level product. This is for somebody who uses microSD cards and a bit of streaming. So I was hoping they would have added Plexamp by now, but they haven't. But Plexamp is a whole other story. I've got a video. By the time this podcast goes out, that video will be out. So you and I have covered the little Shanling ET3 last year. That's a more affordable, slightly lighter portable audio player that does have the Google Play Store. And I think for entry-level portable player holders, that's essential, because it mirrors the sort of functionality of their phone. So they go, I want Spotify on here, so I just go to the Google Play Store and I install it, right? So Astell&Kern are not blind to this, right? So they've got a new portable player, which kind of looks, well, it looks very modern. It's all white. It's sub-brand. It's a
sub-brand, right?
Yes. And I don't know whether it is a sub-brand. They weren't very clear about it, but it's called Activo.
Right.
And it's called, the model number is the P1, but I can't work out whether Activo is the sub-brand or it's called the Activo P1, but we'll just call it the P1. And this is a much more affordable portable player. I'm going to give you the price straight away, I think. Yeah. Excuse me. It's $430 US. So it's $400, but it's significantly lighter, I'm assuming, than the thick boy that I have here. And its battery, I think, goes up to about, is it 15, 16 hours? So it's not huge, but it's better than the 10 hours I get from this big flagship player.
And isn't the chassis a composite? Like half of it is aluminum and the other half is like some kind of a white plastic, right?
Yes, yeah. So it's got like a white plastic wrap around the top, and then the bottom part is aluminium. So I think it's going to be pretty light. I mean, aluminium and plastic is going to be, but they didn't. I don't think they said in the press release what the weight is going to be, but it still has 3.5 mil and then 4.4 millimeter balanced outputs, so you can use balanced with your headphones, which I find very useful for those some of the new planar magnetics that Campfire have put out, because they do need a bit more oomph behind them, those particular drivers. But most importantly, I think it's most importantly, is it runs the Google Play Store. So the operating system on the Activo P1 has the Google Play Store, so we can install any app. So you won't hear me grumbling that there's no Plexamp on this thing, or no RuneArc, or no Spotify, or Tidal, or Qobuz, or Apple Music, because I use that as well. So it's a more accessible, I think, device. I'm going to bet big money that it won't sound as good as this big chunky player, but it's not as heavy, not as big, not as expensive. It's one tenth the price.
Yeah.
And I think Astell&Kern are interesting because they still seem to be leading the audiophile area of portable players, even after 10 years. I mean, they really kicked the market off in 2014, 2013, 2014.
Yeah, I mean, FIO hasn't caught up.
No.
Kayan, Shandling, Lotu, they're all names, but I don't think they're up on the level of Astell&Kern in terms of like visibility, popularity, distribution.
The only one that is Sony. And they have a little player called the NWA306. But its core operating, the processor, the RAM, it can barely run the Android operating system without you swearing at it after a few minutes. Yeah, it was difficult to get along with in the long term. When I reviewed it, I was just about okay with just using the Android OS. It was fine. It was just about tolerable. And the sound was okay. It was disastrous at the start, but they issued a firmware, I think, whilst I was recording the video. So I just managed to tack on a bit at the end to explain, because they'd had some weird bass shelving issue. I don't expect Astell&Kern to have any of those sort of teething problems. They've been doing it for so long that I think they know how to put together a portable player. The amplifier in this P1 is built around something called Teraton Alpha, which, you know, this is a bit of a bugbear of mine, Srajan, I'm sure you'll relate to this, is manufacturers have really gone big on sub-branding the tech that goes into their products, right? So it's got this platform or that platform. But I want to know, what does that mean? What does Teraton Alpha mean? And they just come out with the usual, like I'll read from the press release, sound clarity and broad spatial resonance, or can catch the faintest sounds of instruments you could not hear before. And that doesn't help. It doesn't really help people who want to go deeper on the tech, like you or I would do for this particular product. Like, what does Teraton Alpha mean in terms of amplification?
It's going to be an on-chip amplifier.
It will be, yes. Yeah.
But who made it? Who is it from? And who else is using it?
Exactly. Now, it could be an ESS chip, because the DAC comes from ESS. I'm pretty sure it does. I'm just going to double check that, because yes. So it actually runs a pair of ESS Sabre DAC chips in dual mono. So it may be a customized version of an ESS headphone chip. It might not be.
But if it is, then why not say so, right?
Yeah, it's just...
Why sort of gild it up behind this name that nobody knows what it means?
Well, I think the company that's most guilty of this is iFi in the UK.
Oh, yeah.
You know, just sub-branding absolutely everything. Right, so I want to know what Teraton Alpha means. I don't know what that means. I think they did specify the... Well, the other side of the coin is, Srajan, is like, if they do tell us, let's say, for example, the processor chip, right, and how much RAM there is in there, that still doesn't give you much of a clue as to how janky the OS will or will not be, because you don't know how resource intensive the OS is going to be in the end. It might be very lightweight and very smooth, but it's Android, so it has a certain kind of baggage to it in terms of what it needs power-wise. But I think this will be quite a good player. In fact, my buddy emailed me the day going, what portable player should I buy for a few $100? I said, don't get the Sony. Just don't. And have a look at this Astell&Kern, because it could be pretty good. I still prefer the Shandling over the Sony, even though it's heavier, it's a bit chunkier, because the little Sony is tiny. You could put it in a shirt pocket, which I think was the design brief for that particular product. So it's...
Now, out of curiosity, do you ever use digital EQ that is built into these digital audio players? And if you do you have positive experiences with it?
I never use it. Because, I don't know, like, I mean, the problem is that if I'm using a certain headphone with them, generally it's here because I'm either reviewing it or I have reviewed it or whatever, but generally I want to hear it in its neutral form. So right. I'm not going to mess with its stock sound profile. But I think EQ only takes you so far. I hear people talk about it as if it's some kind of life-changing or headphone-saving feature. It might be. If the bass is overcooked on a headphone, yeah, I can see why that would be useful. Or if the treble's a bit hot, you can pull it down. Actually, I lie. The Bose QC Ultra active noise cancelling true wireless, like little earphone. They're very bassy, and I EQ the bass down. But I don't get too much into the mids here and the treble here and profiles, because I know that ultimately I can't retune one headphone to sound like another one.
Well, the reason I was asking is that I've tried it a few times with very bad results. In fact, I found out that just the moment I activated EQ without doing any changes, but just putting it into the signal path, something distinctly happened. It got worse. The other reason why I was asking is that in a lot of the modern YouTube coverage in this sector...
Oh, they're all about EQ. All about it.
They're all about it.
Yeah.
And I couldn't wrap my head around why that is being made such a big feature.
I can tell you why I think. This is my best guess. Is that the headphone space is very much dominated now, headphone review space, frequency response measurements.
Right.
So you can quite obviously tackle that. But as well, I'm pretty sure that frequency response isn't the only thing that contributes to a headphone sound, right? There's going to be an impulse response of the headphone driver, which is going to be a fairly significant influence on the end result, but you can't EQ that, can you? Because it's time domain. So I don't know, the headphone world is very much frequency response. I want to say captured. It's almost like an ideology, isn't it? It's let's look at this chart and we can pull that down. And I can sort of see that, and I think it has utility, but I don't think what's spoken about enough is where the limits are on that utility. As you say, when you introduce an EQ into a circuit, it sends the signal through the DSP chip that it might not have traveled through before, and can have a deleterious, is that the right word?
Deleterious? I don't know.
Deleterious. Yeah, I can never say it. Yeah, a negative effect. It is deleterious.
Much better.
Yeah, it's a negative effect on the sound. And even it can be quite subtle. I mean, it's like the old iTunes app, the volume. If you just nudge that off 100%,
right,
it would significantly negatively impact the sound quality of what came out of your DAC, because all of a sudden it's no longer bit perfect. So this is probably maybe what it is. Maybe because it's no longer bit perfect, because you're changing the
amplitude.
The frequency. Yes, the amplitude at a certain frequency. Yeah. So people want bit perfect, but they also want EQ, and you can't have both. Anyway, so yeah, I guess some people want EQ. It is a very sort of a fashionable thing. It was not fashionable 10 years ago. People didn't really touch it, did they? I don't know. Don't think so.
I'm wearing a headphone. More than $2,000, but less than $2,500, somewhere in there. And this is a completely ordinary headphone cable stock that comes with it.
Oh, goodness me, I can see where this is going.
This is my Hi-Fi Man Susvara.
Okay. And it has it's got a snake attached to it.
This is the cable that I just recently reviewed. And the only thing that's not stock, not final production about it, is that at the time he sent it to me, he didn't have the wooden splitter that would go here, and he didn't have the wooden ends that would go here. But they would look like this. Just a nice wooden sleeve.
So what you're showing there, hang on, we need to explain this. You're showing.
So what I'm showing is a headphone cable that is basically a quad braid, where each individual wire of the quad braid is thicker than a complete stock headphone cable shipped with Hi-Fi Man Susvara or any sort of premium headphone. So from that fact alone, that we have well more than 4 times the conductive mass, we know that we're going to have lower impedance, we're going to have higher current. More than we can't really predict. I'm not going to talk too much about the actual cable, except to say that the company that makes the raw conductor is LessLoss out of Lithuania. It's the LITS cable. It has a very, very complicated makeup on the inside that is basically noise cancelling. There's 2 completely symmetrical but counterpolarized coils in the cable. That it's a technique called humbucking. that goes back to the 1930s. That's when they invented it. And LessLoss have implemented this in the geometry of their cable. It's quite expensive to make. A gentleman in Poland that I have used as my aftermarket cable supplier for headphones, his name is Matt, and he has a small boutique called Forza Audioworks out of Warsaw in Poland.
Yep.
He bought himself 1 kilometer worth of LessLoss C-MARC cable, and he's turning it into bespoke headphone cables for any headphone that you happen to have. You basically tell him the connectors that you need. These ones need 2.5 mil. You tell them the connector you want on the other end, 4.4 mil, 3.5 mil, XLR 4, 2 XLR 3, whatever the hell you want, the length, he's going to make it. I've heard the cable, and it makes a big difference. That's all I'm going to say.
No, can I actually...
Go ahead.
No, because I want to ask, like, when you... Okay, big difference. Could you contextualize, where does that sit? Is it more of a difference than a change in DAC or change in amplifier? Is it more of a difference than changing the headphone? I mean, because audiophiles...
It's a difference on par with changing a DAC.
Okay.
But I'm gonna talk exactly about what the difference is, because I'm hanging this whole thing, this discussion on the cable, but I really want to talk about the difference.
So I'm getting ahead of myself, right?
Not a problem.
Have I thrown you off, Srajan?
Just a little bit, but I'm having a comeback. You know, we have the Holy Trinity related to frequency response, right? We have bass, mid, and treble, which is a completely arbitrary division of the audible frequency spectrum that consists of 10 octaves, from 20 hertz all the way up to 20 kilohertz. And then within that Holy Trinity of bass, mid, and treble, we cut each one into another 3 segments.
Yes.
So we have the low, the mid, and the upper bass, the low, the mid, and the upper, blah, blah, blah. And that's very easily visualized with graphs, which is probably another reason why talking about frequency response and the effect of EQ is beloved in audio reviews, because you can generate a before and after graph. It's very visual and it looks very scientific, even though a lot of people may not know what it means.
Because some people will only believe what they see.
Correct.
They
won't trust their own hearing.
Right.
But there is another trinity that doesn't get talked about a whole lot. And that is beginning, middle, and end.
Okay. Time domain.
Time domain, and what happens to an individual tone. The tone has a beginning, which we call the transient. It has a middle, which we either call sustain or bloom. And then when it falls off, we call it decay, or we call it the falling edge. We call it the rising edge at the beginning, or the leading edge, or the attack. Right? So beginning, middle, and end. Different equipment can change our perception of the balance between those. And the easiest way that I can visualize it is, imagine yourself standing with one foot in front of the other. And you're perfectly balanced, you're not moving, you have equal weight on both feet. And now move weight onto the back foot, and then move the weight onto the front foot. The moment you put weight onto the front foot, your physical perception of yourself is that a little bit more readiness, a little bit more keenness. You're sort of ready to go into motion. You put the weight on the back foot, there's a little bit more repose, a little bit more like waiting, a little bit more like grounded and relaxed. You're not as ready to sort of jump into action. Now, if you do this so much that an outside observer could see you shift the weight, it would be quite drastic. But if you did it so subtly that nobody would see anything, but you would know whether your weight is on the front foot or the back foot, and you shift back and forth, there would be a different feeling that you have in your body. The same is true for the tonal beginning and the tonal end. When we have more weight on the tonal beginning, more emphasis, the sound seems to be snappier. It also seems to be sharper. It seems to be crisper, more incisive. It might even sort of cut through more clearly. If there's more weight on the rear, which would be the decays, and how long it takes before we stop hearing them, the feeling is a little bit more of repose, relaxation, and softness. On top of that, if our component or our system allows us to track the fades for a really, really long time, so the sound sort of gets quieter and quieter, but we can still hear it. Then each new sound that arises while another sound is still dying. And so if we have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 tones, all in sequence, and all of them have very, very long fades, by the time the 6th tone rises, the other fades are still active. The other fades are still enveloping this first tone with decay.
So you have a cascading effect.
Yeah, and very often we call that like hall sound or ambience. We sort of hear the space because the sound lingers. And so when a component is very, very good about portraying elongated fades, the sound tends to get softer because each leading edge is surrounded or enveloped or closed in decay that's still lingering from the note that came before.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Right? So what this cable does, and what the long version on the headphone does, it shifts the balance from the leading edge, where the sound sounds very jumpy and crisp, it shifted to the back, and very noticeably so. The sound feels a little heavier, it feels darker, it feels softer, and it feels richer. But there's something else as well. And I think that has to do with that we just have more conductive mass and we have lower impedance. So when we have a rise, the rise goes higher. And I talk about this, you can imagine this like when you have just mowed the lawn and all the grass is exactly even. That's basically my image for zero dynamic range. Everything sounds equally loud and nothing sticks out. And it looks like a redacted Secret Service document. Like there's these blocks of black, and there's no variation at all. It's completely boring, right?
Yeah.
In our weather here in Ireland, where it rains a lot, 3 or 4 days after the lawnmower man has come, you can already see certain blades of grass being taller than the rest. And some of the weeds, they grow even faster. So after a week, the average grass is just a little taller, but now you have a lot of sort of fast-growing grass that's sticking out. And the tallest weeds will be like 3 times the size they were just 4 days ago. That's extended dynamic range. Most of the music is the mowed grass, and then you have faster growing grass, which is like dynamic peaks, and then you have peaks that crest even higher, the really fast growing weeds. And so this cable is like fast growing grass. So when you have transients where somebody really leans in or hits the drum and there's like this really, really high rise, they will rise higher than with this cable. So the music will at the same time sound more dynamic, as it also sounds darker and weightier and richer because there's more emphasis on the decay of the notes. So that's the other trinity that happens in the time domain. And I'm not exactly sure what kind of measurement would show where this balance is weighted. Like the impulse response, it would certainly show whether the impulse goes straight up or it's sort of lazy, and does it crest very high or does it sort of peter out sooner. I would expect that we would see something there, but I don't know really of any other popular measurements that would show it, but it's certainly something you can hear. And this cable makes that difference. And different components or systems are tuned for what their owner likes, whether they did it knowingly or not. And some systems are very sort of forward-leaning and very percussive and crisp, and there's lots of staccato going on. And other systems are like more like a Chopin piano piece. There's ebb and flow, there's lots of lingering, it sounds relaxed, it's not like a marching band. And that can be tuned. But I don't actually know what measurements one would look for in specs to know what a component is going to do unless one actually has it in the system. But it's certainly something that I think deserves to be talked about when we describe what something sounds like. And we should let our readers or viewers know what kind of sound we prefer so that they can relate. Am I like a forward-leaning kind of a person? That would be the kind of person that likes to sit very close to the stage, like front row. Because you get a lot of the direct sound, there's very, very little loss, and you hear very little hall sound because you're sitting too close. Now, if I'm a listener in a classical concert that likes to sit up in the balcony, I might be 15 rows away from the stage, plus I'm up in the balcony, I'm in the rear of the hall, so I hear 70 or 80% reflected sound and much, much less direct sound. I now would be a listener, if that's the kind of sound I like, because I habitually prefer the far seats, I would really like this. I would like what this cable does. And the last thing I wanted to say is about those people that claim that cables make no difference. I would say that if you compare an arbitrary two cables, it's very, very likely that you won't hear a difference. But now compare 20 different cables. And I will bet you anyone will be able to tell at least one out of those 20 cables, one AB, that sound distinctly different. Why? I'm not going to get into that. And is it a matter of price? I'm not going to get into that. This cable is not going to be cheap, but you can buy the raw ingredient as a off-the-spool, do-it-yourself version from LessLoss, and you can roll your own. The one thing that you need to be good at is this is a Litz cable, which means that all the 293 hairs that are in each individual leg, they are all individually enameled. So in order to create a conductive joint at the end, you have to melt off the enamel of each individual hair. Yeah. And then you have to get that thick cable into a plug that is this small.
Right, is that a 2.5 mil plug?
That's a 2.5 mil plug.
Okay.
That is a bitch and a half to try to get that thick raw conductor to...
Yeah.
So it can be done, and one does not have to spend the... This is estimated to come in at about 1,250 euros for a 1.5 meter terminated cable with your choice of terminations. You certainly don't have to spend that if you want to make your own. But it won't be exactly the same, because this is not the do-it-yourself off-the-spool conductor.
Sure. So again, you either pay with money or time.
Yes, and if you have an expensive headphone like this, 2200, the Hi-Fi Man Susvara was 6 at the time. The new version, which is called Susvara Unveiled, where you can sort of take off the back panel,
yes.
I believe that's 8,000.
Yeah.
If you're playing in those leagues and you have your Astell&Kern sort of 4,000 euro digital audio player, and there's no other electronics that you need to make sound. You have your transducers and you have your electronics. And you still have money to spend, and you still think that maybe you can make these two pieces sound better. This is one way that you can do it. You can change the cable and see whether you can make enough of a difference with the right cable that seems to justify whatever they want for it.
I have one more. This is quite simple, actually, Srajan. I think it's quite simple. Well, it's a turntable, right? It's not even a new model. So it comes from Pro-Ject, or Pro-Ject, right? And a few years ago, and this is when I had a phase where when I started out this reviewing thing, I didn't want to review turntables because they were sort of like my sort of private area of enjoyment where I wasn't sort of consumed by comparisons or just thoughts of what does this shit sound like. And then I had a couple of years after I started YouTube of doing them, but I've since sort of pulled away from that, even though I have lots of turntables in my videos. I got like 4 turntables here, but they're just for me or just to feature in videos. But anyway, One of the turntables that I did review a few years ago was the Debut Pro from Pro-Ject, and I'm gonna start with the price because it sold for €750. So it's not especially fancy. It's kind of what you would maybe call a mid-tier turntable, maybe. But it had a cartridge on it called the Picket Pro, which I believe Pro-Ject co-developed with Autophon. And that was a moving magnet cartridge. Now, I remember a few years ago, Heinz Lichtenegger of Pro-Ject, we were walking up the stairs, I can't remember where it was, and he was telling me, look, John, do you realise that an MC cartridge is actually innately balanced? And I'd never kind of thought about this before, and I thought it was a bit of an odd thing to say, but it all makes sense now, because in the years that have followed that conversation, Heinz has introduced numerous turntables with a balanced connector on the back and balanced output. But generally speaking, the prerequisite for that balanced output is the presence of an MC cartridge. Now, what Pro-Ject have introduced recently is something called the Debut Pro. Is it the B? Debut Pro B? So it's like the balanced version of the Debut Pro. Yeah, it's called Debut Pro B, and it's got a balanced connector on the back. I think it's a mini XLR, so you might have to buy a separate adapter. Now, I don't know necessarily whether this is an automatic sonic upgrade, but I tend to think that audiophiles love the presence of a balanced connection. And I used to be of the persuasion that balance was best, but I've kind of since, I don't know, like I just don't see the innate advantage, especially when the components are so close. But there is one exception. One of my turntables is to my right, and it runs 5 meters to the amplifier. So I use a balanced cable just to reduce the possibility of getting an earth hum or just an issue. But I think it's smart business from Pro-Ject to start rolling out, balanced turntables, and they've got balanced phono stages to pair with them and things like that. So you can go now balanced all the way from your MC cartridge all the way into your amplifier if you want to. But what's interesting about this new Debut Pro B is the cartridge on it is not moving coil. It's still moving magnet. And I did ask the Pro-Ject representative who sent me the press release, I'm like, how have they done this with a moving magnet and still they've managed to maintain the balanced connection? Now, I guess it's because there are 4 poles on a moving coil cartridge, just like there are 4 poles on a balanced cable, so you've got plus and minus for each side, whereas with a single-ended connection, you've got plus, minus, no ground. So it's like a 3-pole connection. Is that right, Srajan? Do I have that? Have I explained that properly? Right.
By the time we get into turntables, I'm lost.
But it's still the topology of the connection rather than just so what comes. But there are still 4 wires essentially that come off the back of the cartridge, this moving magnet cartridge. So they've managed to internally wire it so that it behaves in a balanced way. But I'm not entirely sure how they've done it. Again, it's a collaboration, I believe, with Autophon. There is an explainer up on Pro-Ject's website about all of this. I will put that in the show notes below for anybody that wants to know how is it balanced and how they've done it. But I'm more interested, I think, really in the why. Like, why is Pro-Ject going so hard? Because they've got so many balanced versions of the turntables now. They've brought out balanced step-up transformers, balanced phono stages. So I think it's all predicated on this concept that and you and I have spoken about this many times, audiophile catnip. I think balance is the original audiophile catnip that audiophiles are just drawn to because they think it's a superior connection. And it might be, or it might not be. And it may be that if you've got 2 cables that are the same model and one's single-ended, one's balanced, it might just be the topology that makes the improvement. I don't know. But generally, most people don't have the same cable in single-ended form with RCAs on the end and balanced form with XLR sockets on the end. So it's difficult.
Do.
You do?
I have a few.
Oh, yes, but I say most people.
But it's not just the cable. The balanced connection cancel more distortion
Yes.
or noise.
Yes.
But on the send and receive end, we also need to look at how the balance is implemented. And basically, balance means two of everything, right? You
Yes.
need exactly twice the circuitry to do it properly, including you need a 4-gang attenuator. And very often, so-called balanced components, when you look at them, the attenuator is single-ended, it's not balanced. So they go in balanced, have to convert to single-ended, attenuate the signal, then turn it balanced again to the output. And when you compare the sound to just going single-ended in and out all the way through, it will actually sound better because it's not a true balanced component front to back.
Right.
Sometimes balance is achieved with an op-amp.
Right.
So just the presence of a balanced connector doesn't necessarily mean that the component, the signal
Itself.
path preceding it, is fully balanced. So we are back down to having to trust our ears with a given system and see whether balanced actually sounds better. And if it does, we still don't know why exactly. Is it the cable? Is it the component? Is it all of it? Something else altogether?
Well, you've said something very important there. So in the balanced, theoretically, in its topology, can strip away the noise because it takes the signal and then creates an inverted copy of that signal and then subtracts that inverted copy from the original. So you're doing x minus negative x, which gives you 2x, right? In mathematical terms.
If your two signal halves are completely identical,
Yes.
just out of phase. And now how to arrive at two completely identical signal halves when you have an amplification gain stage that maybe has 3 stages. And they all have to be completely identical. And if, for example, like on the LAiV, we have 4 output devices per channel, now they all need to be matched on one side towards each other, and then they have to be matched with the opposite channel as well, ideally. So now we need 8 perfectly matched parts. How closely can we actually realistically match those parts if we don't start out with 10,000 to whittle them down to like these little heaps? You know, and how much is the manufacturer prepared to do? And that's just talking about individual parts, not just whole circuits. So from my perspective, from what I think that I've learned is that balance is definitely the standard in Pro, where you might have literally 100 meters worth of cabling connecting a preamp to a microphone, to an amplifier on the stage, and then to the guitar, etc., etc. But at home, where we have shorter distances, the cost, complexity, and engineering required to create perfectly symmetrical circuits might be completely out of bounds relative to the benefits that one might get. But I could see how phono might be an exception because phono is so susceptible to noise.
Right, because it's a very low-level signal, yes.
Yeah, and we may have to apply between 50 to 70 dB of gain in the phono stage to even get to anything approximating what comes out of a CD player or a DAC in terms of signal voltage. And so any little noise that we can shave off between the cartridge and the phono stage in the cable or in the way that the cartridge is wired up, that should be beneficial. That might make a difference one can hear.
But you've also hit on another great point. So, for example, my turntable on this side of me, I've got to be careful how I lean here because I've got some speakers behind me that haven't been announced yet. So I can't expose them. And I've only realised halfway through this podcast, oh, God, fuck, I've got those speakers behind me. Anyway, so I've got this Pro-Ject phono stage behind me, which has balance in and out. But I don't know whether it's... I don't want to say fake balance because that's, it's a bit spicy. But whether it's a true balanced connection. It might be, but the reason I say this is because when you're looking at a component, whether it's a DAC or a phono stage or whatever, and it's got XLR connected on the back, as you've said, it might be cheating a little bit with op amps just inside either side of those XLR sockets, right? So it might take a a balanced connector, but then convert it to single-ended, run single-ended all the way through the unit, and then when it wants to pop balance out at the other end, it just uses another op-amp to convert it back to balanced.
Or a transformer.
Right. Is it a transformer at that end, is it?
It could be transformer balanced, it could be op-amp balanced.
So I'm being very careful. I'm not saying that Pro-Ject necessarily have done that, but there are components that do that. They have XLR connectors, but they're not balanced per se. And I know that, Jason from Shit talks about this quite a lot. It's like he's calling cheating balance. So again, it's another way that the dogma of balanced connections can trip you up. If you're determined to, you've really got to dig into it. So you've really got to email the manufacturer and ask them, how have they implemented the balanced connection in that box? Is it proper balanced? So I've got a phono stage down on this side, and it only has single-ended inputs, but it's got balanced outputs. So I could email PS Audio and ask, but the thing is, I don't care to do that because I love how it sounds. Right. So it's like, it just doesn't. In some ways, it doesn't matter. But
I know that my Kinky amplifiers are single-ended, but they have XLR inputs.
Right.
And they are what we would call a convenience XLR.
Right. That's a nice way of putting it. A convenience XLR, yes.
Yeah, and if the convenience XLR is now driven by a truly balanced preamp, it might sound better than having the conversion from truly balanced to single-ended happen in the preamp with its RCA outputs, and then drive the Kinky single-ended. Again, there's no way to predict that. One would have to actually try both, and preferably or ideally with the same cable from the same company, the same level of cable, just with different connections, so that we know it's not the cable quality that's making the difference. We're having equivalent cabling, XLR and RCA, and we see what sounds better. Now, very often also, but not always, the XLR will have twice the voltage. Sometimes it can have 4 times the voltage.
Yes.
So it will play louder, so then we have to adjust the volume to make sure we do a fair comparison.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems to me that balanced in this the little world of balanced connectivity, there are so many other variables to consider other than than that which the dogma suggests. The dogma is just like, well, balanced is better, or balanced will sound better, or balance will reduce the noise, which it probably, on the balance of probabilities, the balanced connection will more likely than not reduce the chance of a hum being introduced into the circuit. And that's why the pro guys are all over it, because they can't run huge lengths of single-ended cable, right? Because it's going to be noisy at some point.
Well, the cable itself will also act as an antenna. It will pick off EMI and RF noise.
Yes. But I mean, I've got a 3-meter run of AudioQuest Yukon, maybe even a 5-meter run. And I have used it, and it's never created any noise issues for me. But like I say, I run, 5 meters of balance, but that's the only, pretty much. Oh no, I run it over here as well. I don't know. See, I get drawn into it sometimes. I get drawn into the allure of balance, and I guess the whole point of bringing this up is to check myself, but also check other people. Go, look, hang on a minute. It might be good, but there's other things to consider, and you don't know necessarily whether your components are proper balanced, or whether they've got convenience balanced, or what a single-ended connection would sound like if you had one of those.
See, at the end of the day, I think this is the only thing that separates busy long-term reviewers from average listeners. Is experience. It's the only difference. Very often end users may know more than we do. They may be technically much more proficient.
Yep.
They may be able to design and build their own amplifiers. But chances are they haven't listened to as many things in as many different combinations as somebody like yourself who's done this for 10 years. And, I've been doing it for 20-some years. And I have, in many, many years, reviewed 6 components per month. Done it, and I do more mixing and matching that I don't even talk about. And I think that gives us the experience to know for ourselves that hardly any of this stuff is predictive.
Exactly.
That you can't make decisions based on any of those specs. There might be sort of probability, And it might be quite high, but you will always find an exception if you do this long enough. So at the end of the day, you come back down to saying, well, for everything that I know, I really know very little or nothing indeed. And I have to trust my ears and be happy to experiment and then go with what I prefer. Even if I can't explain why, it doesn't really matter because I'm only supposed to please myself. I don't need to convince anybody else that what I do is right. It's right as long as I enjoy it. It's very, very basic, but I think that's the only thing that really distinguishes reviewers from the average end users. There will be some enthusiasts that have gone to more shows than I've gone, and they'll be hanging out at their local hi-fi store every week, listening to new stuff coming in. There is people like that, but the average consumer doesn't do a lot of comparisons.
I think
so they still believe or they still hope in the sanctity of measurements and what they will tell us relative to what's good and what might go well together and what's sort of an outstanding value in a particular component class. But the longer I do that, the less I feel that any of that really correlates. Even though there's sort of trends.
Yes.
But every exception basically demolishes, my faith in trends.
Well, I guess a good example of that is the speaker I've just covered, which is the Klipsch Heresy 4, whose frequency response graph, as seen on Hi-Fi News' website, to say it's, I described it as sauce and pickles, in a burger. It's kind of funky. But I think, you talked about the forward nature of sound and the way, the percussive, and it puts you on the edge of your seat, that kind of thing. I like that, and that's what the Klipsch give me. So the frequency response anomalies don't trouble me because I'm excited. Maybe it's the time domain response of the drivers, I don't know. But it's just, or it's the dynamics that override everything else. So I don't tend to notice, maybe there's a suck out somewhere, or there is definitely a mid-bass hump. You can definitely hear that. But you can't, I would never be able to predict whether I would like that speaker from just looking at that graph. Not a hope. Some people might think they can. I don't know, but that's not something I could do.
It's also that our rooms have their own frequency response, which is very non-linear, right?
Absolutely.
But we get very much used to it.
That's also
and
true.
I remember at one show in Munich talking to Richard Vanderstein, who had a new speaker, new at the time, that had a very adjustable bass system with, I think, 12 different EQ points and then pots that you had to rotate by screwdriver. And he had taken the measurement of the room and he had said, what's very important is that you don't use EQ too much. He says you don't want to override the room's signature, because the moment you walk in and the moment you hear your own footfall and you hear your own voice in the room and you're talking to me, Richard, before I even hit play, your brain has already mapped the signature of the room. And if now the speaker is trying to completely erase the room's signature by completely doing the mirror image, he said that's too much. And he said your brain will notice and it will not sound realistic. He says, yes, we want to take the peaks down a little bit. If we can, maybe we want to fill out the troughs, even though primarily it's about the peaks. But he says we don't want to do too much of it. We don't want to get it completely flat. Just beyond excessive. He said that will sound much better. So even there, the perfect frequency response is not what an experienced listener will prefer. Even though the armchair engineers behind their keyboard will point at a frequency response like your Klipsch and say, whoever listens to that speaker is a fool because that thing is broken. Well, they don't really know what they're talking about. Or they're looking at the wrong thing in isolation. It's just one part of the picture, and there might be other parts that are as valid or even more valid. And
this is what I'm saying, the dynamics make it more valid,
And some listeners are more cued into the time domain. So if the time domain is more correct, less damaged, they can put up with a whole lot more sort of variability in the frequency domain and say, yes, I know that speaker is slightly up there, slightly down there, but it doesn't bother me because the other thing to me is more important. But where are the measurements to show that part, the one where I talked the beginning, middle, and end, the time domain, we have a step response. You know, we can show decay in a cabinet. We can show which frequencies decay faster than others. But how predictive that is relative to our listening experience, I don't know.
I don't know either. No idea. Anyway, Srajan, we've spoken for nearly 2 hours, so let's bring it to a close. We don't have any more, do we? Do we have any more? Okay, I don't think we have any more. Okay, well let's call it a wrap then. Our work here is done. I will see you again in a few weeks, I hope.
Sounds good.